much more than I ever knew. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
This is the inside story of the Vietnam War.
The jungle blinded you, rice paddies crippled you.
Told by those who lived through it and will always live with it.
I was born in Vietnam. That's where I became a man.
A mission to contain the spread of communism in Southeast Asia spirals into non-stop killing with no end in sight.
We were frightened 24 hours a day. There was no let up.
That's when I realized how worried I was about getting out alive.
Right up and down there.
Good here. Roger, keep them coming.
Let's move, people, and take this fucking hill. Let's go.
We're here to support one of the main themes of the moratorium, which is business as usual. And so we're here, obviously, as citizens, protesting what we feel is the tragedy of the Vietnamese War.
The Vietnam War spanned from 1955 to 1975 and is infamous for being one of the most unpopular wars in American history. The conflict, never declared an official war despite being described as one, involved North Vietnam, which was under communist control, and non-communist South Vietnam, who eventually allied with America to stop the spread of communism. But perhaps what is even more fascinating than the war itself was America's response to it. During an era of attempted peace, equality, and counterculture power, the Vietnam War summed up exactly what many college students, intellectuals, and hippies saw wrong with America. Contrary to popular belief, prior to the United States' involvement in the war, the majority of people supported the war in Vietnam. The anti-war sentiment began with small leftist groups and peace activists on college campuses, only gaining national support when the U.S. entered the war in 1965. The war took a turn August 1964 when North Vietnam torpedoed 2 U.S. destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin, and President LBJ ordered the United States to retaliate.
As President and Commander-in-Chief, it is my duty to the American people to report that renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
Many people questioned the government's decision to be involved in the war and blamed the president. Unlike previous wars, the reasons behind the United States' decision to become involved was unclear to many people, and many suspected the government wasn't being fully truthful.
In every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society 2 requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. 2 requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent. It requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. Nevertheless, every democracy recognizes the necessary restraints of national security.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee." Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring when we gather. When we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last."
Here it comes. Now the prisoner, one of the white spiders changed from his t-shirt.
Let me have it. I want it.
Being let out by Captain Fritz. There is the prisoner.
There is Lee. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's a man with a gun. It's absolute panic. Absolute panic here in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters. Detectives have their guns drawn. There is no question about it. Oswald has been shot at point-blank range, fired into his stomach.
He is shot. He is shot. Oswald.
It is Oswald. You're... Was that the man that shot the man, or do you know?
That is the man that shot the man.
On April 26th, 19,000 more documents related to the Kennedy assassination were released, giving conspiracy theorists and history enthusiasts something to obsess over for a few days. The only problem is, this batch is kind of boring. There's not much there except for an interesting 1975 interview with CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton, who believed two New York Times journalists, Ted Salk, now dead, and Seymour Hersh, still living and writing, were actually working for a foreign intelligence service. He would not admit that they were Russian spies, but said the CIA definitely had files on them. Ooh, the plot thickens. Anyways, since this release was kind of a conspiratorial boner wrecker, we thought it might be fun to address another set of JFK facts, the ever-circulating list of, quote, coincidences between he and Abraham Lincoln. For example, Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy, and Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. So, in rapid-fire succession, here's the truth and fiction to several of the claims about these two presidents. 1. Let's start with that one, the secretaries. False. While JFK did have a secretary named Evelyn Lincoln, Lincoln's secretaries were named John G. Nicolay and John Hay. 2. Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater, and Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln, which was made by Ford. True. The vehicle Kennedy was shot in was an SS-100X, a beefed-up 1961 Lincoln Continental. 3. John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839, and Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939. False. Booth was born in 1838. 4. Both the Lincolns and the Kennedys lost children while in the White House. True. Willie Lincoln died of typhoid in 1862, while Jackie Kennedy gave birth to a premature child who died in 1963. 5. John Wilkes Booth ran from a theater and was caught in a warehouse, while Lee Harvey Oswald ran from a warehouse and was caught in a theater. False. Booth did run from a theater, but was killed instead in a tobacco shed. 6. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808, while Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. True. 7. Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846, while Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. True. 8. Lincoln was elected president in 1860, while Kennedy was elected president in 1960. Yes, again, true. 9. The names Lincoln and Kennedy each contain 7 letters, which is true, even though, come on guys, it's a bit of a stretch. 10. Both presidents were shot in the head on a Friday. True. 11. Both assassins were killed before they could stand trial. True. 12. Lastly, Lincoln was in Monroe, Maryland a month before his assassination, while Kennedy was in Maryland, Monroe a month before his assassination. As much as we want this to be true, false. Marilyn Monroe had tragically passed away more than a year before Kennedy was killed. What's your favorite Lincoln-Kennedy coincidence?
As ruler of Cambodia, Pol Pot was responsible for killing nearly 2 million people. That's a quarter of the country's population. In his 4-year reign, Pol Pot tortured and starved the Cambodians to death. Men, women, children, and babies. He turned Cambodia into a killing field.
When I first spoke with Pol Pot, he refused to take responsibility for an absolutely cataclysmic, catastrophic destruction of innocent people.
No one had a clue at how many people had been slaughtered and how many people had died. No one.
On the 17th of April 1975, a guerrilla army known as the Khmer Rouge entered the Cambodian capital Phnom Penh, victors of a 5-year war against a government backed by the Americans. The Khmer Rouge leader was a man most Cambodians had never heard of.
Now their economy was one of the poorest on earth, but their army was one of the largest. In fact, only the superpowers had more men under arms. As tensions rose with Peking, the Vietnamese began secretly planning for a new military campaign. But first they needed insurance from a superpower ally.
The Vietnamese prepared in their own way to set up a friendly regime in Cambodia. And in doing that, they consulted the Soviets, and they also looked at the possibilities of reactions they would get from other countries, particularly China, if the regime in Cambodia was overthrown. And this is why they consulted the Soviets and then agreed to the Soviet suggestion, which was made much earlier, to sign a treaty of friendship. The Soviets actually suggested to the Vietnamese as early as 1975 that we should sign a treaty of friendship. Vietnamese turned that down. But then in 1978, the Vietnamese approached the Soviets saying, we would like to sign the treaty, because Vietnamese knew that that treaty would buy them an insurance against likely or possible Chinese reaction to what they're going to do in Cambodia. So in November 78, the Vietnamese signed a treaty with the Soviet Union.
In December 1978, the Khmer Rouge launched a fairly small attack into Vietnam, northwest of Ho Chi Minh City in Tay Ninh province, and it was at this point that the Vietnamese hit. They decided that enough was enough. They were going to go for broke. They had neither the political nor the underlying current of a revolution in Kampuchea, and they decided to go for broke. They did this with a tactic known as the Blooming Lotus, which merely is a textbook drive straight down highways. They picked 3 main highways into Kampuchea, where all highways lead to Phnom Penh, and they simply drove down the highways, splitting up the Pol Pot forces as they went. The idea was simply to reach Phnom Penh and into western Kampuchea as quickly as possible, establish as much control of the roads and the strategic areas as possible, as quickly as possible. And this is what they did with the so-called Blooming Lotus. The Pol Pot forces were put into massive disarray. So the original tactic did work. It did establish the command, and it did get the Vietnamese into Phnom Penh, where they could quickly claim victory. It took some 2 weeks to reach Phnom Penh.
When the capital fell on the 7th of January 1979, the Vietnamese had won control of Kampuchea. After 3.5 years of terror, the Pol Pot regime had collapsed.
June of 1989, the Chinese Communist government declared war on its own civilians. Using tanks, machine guns, and APCs, the Chinese authorities murdered and maimed tens of thousands of unarmed men, women, and children in the heart of Beijing, the capital of China. Most of the victims had committed no crime. Many were innocent bystanders, murdered in their kitchens, in their beds, or while watching TV. Others were mothers and fathers frantically searching for their children, or old men and women as they rode home in buses or looked out windows into the streets. Yet others were students who dared to challenge the small cadre of ruthless dictators, less than a dozen corrupt old men, who used their power to enrich themselves, their families, and their friends. The students had dared to call for freedom, for justice and liberty, the end of corruption, and for a democratic government that listened and served the people. "We want democracy," they chanted. "Corruption and dictatorship must end." Millions of people from Beijing and across China supported the students and echoed these demands. And it is for this reason that the dictators of communist China, less than a dozen corrupt old men, declared war against the people, terrorizing millions and maiming and killing tens of thousands of unarmed women and men. The story you're about to hear cannot be heard in China. The gangsters and dictators who govern China will not allow the Chinese people to see the images and pictures you will see. Even this film of a single man, a student, who dared to confront the military might of China's military machine, strikes terror in the hearts of the dictators of China, who fear the Chinese people might be inspired and may stand up and fight for their freedom, for liberty, and for justice once again. The turmoil ended and began with death, sparked by the demise of Hu Yaobang, the former General Secretary of the Communist Party and a hero to millions of Chinese. Hu Yaobang had championed freedom and liberty and had freed 1 million Chinese who had been unjustly imprisoned since the time of Mao's Cultural Revolution. The people called him the soul of China. But when he fought for freedom, and when he dared to fight corruption within the ranks of the Communist Party, the top leaders fought back and removed him from power. Hu Yaobang had been removed 2 years before his death because of his liberalism and the tolerant attitude he had towards similar student demonstrations which had broken out in the 1980s. Deng Xiaoping, senior leader and chairman of the military commission, and the most powerful man in China, disagreed, for he believed he had the most to lose. Deng demanded the demonstrations be stopped and stripped his protege of his power. Hu Yaobang was demoted and replaced by Zhao Ziyang, another champion of freedom and reform. Within 2 years, Zhao Ziyang would be placed under arrest by the right wing of the Communist Party. Hu was a symbol, and his death was a spark that inflamed a nation. Nearly 5,000 university students marched to Tiananmen Square, carrying his picture, and to place a wreath on the monument to the revolutionary martyrs, making spontaneous speeches and shouting slogans demanding freedom and democracy. The students chanted, "The wrong man died. He who died should be alive. Those who live should be dead." By crying out, "The wrong man died," was a safe way of criticizing Deng Xiaoping and Li Peng, the premier of China. They gathered at the base of the monument to the revolutionary martyrs, singing an old French revolutionary song, Internationale.
You can have all the money in your hands, all the possessions anyone could ever have, but it's all worthless treasure. True worth is only measured not by what you got, but what you got in your heart. You can have everything, but what does it mean? It all means nothing if you don't stand up for something. You can't just talk that talk, you gotta walk that walk. Yes, you do. It all means nothing if you don't stand up for something. I stand up for you. Stand up for you. Yes, I will. Yes, I will. You do the best that you can do. Then you can look in the mirror, proud of us looking back at you. Define the life you're living. Not by what you take, but what you're giving. And if you fight on love, there's no way you'll ever lose. Take a stand, make a stand for what's right. Always worth the fight. It all means nothing if you don't stand up for something. You can't just talk the talk, you gotta walk that walk. Yeah, it all means nothing if you don't stand up for something. And I'll stand up for you. Self-respect, dignity. If that's all you got, then you got all you need. And without that, you don't have a thing. No. Rise up, love in your hands. I stand with you 'cause I understand. Ain't just to take a stand. The greater plans, the Creator's plan. Let's all rise like the day began. Reach out and touch with the Savior's hand. On what we stand like His native land. Let the ways of love be the ways of man.